the Shack and Move show. James Baldwin once said that if I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see. We're talking about nature today. We're talking about disasters and the individuals who folks often don't see being impacted.
Nature's fighting back, man. I mean, we just had Hurricane, was it Michelle?
Melissa.
Melissa. I thought it was Michelle. Okay.
Michelle's that girl you used to go out with
No,
back in
I
high
don't know. I
school.
don't know that. I don't know too many Michelles now. But yeah, Hurricane Melissa. I know it was an M that hit Jamaica and other islands, man. And and what does it mean when you think we keep having these hurricanes, hitting our Caribbean islands?
Well, it's another example of the colonizers, right?
Yeah.
Because the sets of values that they brought forward are, playing a significant role right now in driving how policy looks. And
Yeah.
because of that, we continue to strengthen these storms. I mean, the reality is in Jamaica, man, they got hit by a category
Five.
5 hurricane.
What did it give to like? I was talking to my spouse about it. Was it 100? Was it 185? Was it 185 miles?
Over 185 miles an hour.
So there's not a category 6, but should we have a? That's a question. Should we actually change the scale, the rating, so we actually have category 6 now? Because when they did that, they weren't talking about climate change. They weren't talking about the fact that greenhouse gases, all this fossil fuels that we burning all around the world, are basically fueling this engine where these hurricanes are stronger and more intense. So maybe we should have a category 6 and a category 7.
We're definitely going to need to have a category 6, but the question becomes, why do we have a category 6? And it's because we continue not to do the things that are necessary for us to minimize and to begin to weaken instead of strengthen. So, we got to call it like it is. And we got to have the categories in place, but we also got to do the work that's necessary, and we can't keep denying.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think what's sad for me is, seeing Hurricane Katrina, devastate New Orleans. I mean, it's been hurricanes before that, right? So, but the lessons not being learned from that devastation. So what happened in the lower ninth, right? And those impacts, and how, again, New Orleans is in the bowl, right? So think about the flooding that occurred, but who was impacted disproportionately by the flooding? So you think about, whether it be hurricanes, heat waves. I always like to say heat waves are hell for the poor and the elderly, right? If you got forest fires, or you got extreme rain events, you got extreme cold, it's the same people, time and time again, who are impacted disproportionately. But in many cases, the people who are impacted the most are ones who contribute the least to the greenhouse gas emissions that are fueling these climate events, right?
Yeah, when you talk about Hurricane Katrina, I was there on the ground as a part of the emergency response team.
Yeah.
So I got a chance to actually see. It was one of the first natural disasters I ever worked. And you literally get to see bodies floating in the water. And when you see something like that, it changes everything because it's real, It's not theoretical. It's not something that happens someplace else. It's right there in front of you. When you see those tears coming down mothers' faces because they can't find their babies, or because you can't find your grandmama or your granddaddy, or folks stuck on roofs wondering when the government is coming to save me, that's real. And that's why we got to pay attention to what's going on, because we're talking about real people and real lives that are being lost.
Yeah, I mean, you see the people who were displaced by Katrina, and he had other hurricanes over the years, like Hurricane Sandy, what it did in New Jersey, New York, right? You had Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey it just stayed over Houston. I think it jumped 31 trillion gallons of rain. I'm not sure how much rain it is. Everybody, out there, folks listening, that's a lot of rain, y'all. Houston, people flooded, people got stuck in their cars, right? You had Hurricane Michael. Then you had wasn't a hurricane that hit New Orleans like on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah, came all through the Gulf Coast.
And then that same hurricane, it moved up the eastern seaboard and then dumped rain in New Jersey, New York. So people got stuck in their cars. You saw rats being flooded out in the sewers in New York, and then people died in basement apartments in New York City. Because what's happening is we think about hurricanes and the rain associated with it. Our cities are not prepared for all the rain. Our cities are not prepared for the flooding. But again, with all those the lives lost and the damage that we get from the hurricanes, we still see that there's a total lack of preparedness. And in response, even with some of the hurricanes in the Gulf Coast, now we got the Cajun, it was the Cajun Navy
Yep.
that shows up,
Yep.
which is great because people going out there helping, people. But where's the government at? Why are our state governments so unprepared? Why is the federal now? Prior to the Trump administration, I'm gonna say, why was the federal government not as prepared? But now with the Trump administration, you see they getting rid of NOAA, trying to get rid of FEMA. This one basically want everybody, in my opinion, to die or suffer by themselves. And having no federal response to me is a travesty. What do you think about that?
Well, I remember President Bush flying over after Hurricane Katrina, not even coming down on the ground to actually see what was really going on. So when you ask about the government, that's my baseline right there of not having dignity for the folks who were being impacted, not caring enough to actually make sure that the resources that were needed were in place. And so as the federal government goes, often is how state governments go.
Well, you say resources. I remember with Hurricane Maria, I think hit Florida. Trump gave resources. He threw people paper towels.
He sure
So
did.
here's some
Ain't that
paper
something?
towels.
Right.
Go sop that water up. That your whole island's been flooded. Yep. People didn't have power for how many months? They didn't have power, right? They didn't have power, but he said paper towels would do it. That's the problem when you have people like Trump and how they dehumanize folks, forget about people, treat them like like they don't exist. Even when you talk about Bush and that flyover, I think I forget the name of the FEMA director or one of his folks. He called him, "You're doing a great job, Brownie." I remember that quote. Slap on the back, like, great job, when all those folks were suffering and dying, but supposedly they were doing a great job. So you see the same thing happen, I think now, with some of the recent weather events that you've seen in this country, how they got rid of the funding. And then also President Trump is holding states hostage. If you don't support this program, if you don't bow down, kiss the ring, you're not going to get federal funding.
Yeah, we used to think 50-year and 100-year floods was as significant as it was going to get. And now we see 100-year, 500-year, some people label them as biblical floods that are happening all across. It happens in urban settings. It happens also in a lot of rural communities now because folks have not made the investments to, actually be able to mitigate some of the harms that are out there. So when I talk about 21st century infrastructure, it is both in the urban setting and in the rural setting about what we need to do to better prepare folks, because denial is not going to save anybody's lives. It might make some politicians feel good to be able to create that disinformation and misinformation, but the reality is that nature does not care about your politics. It's going to keep coming, it's going to keep moving, and we continue to strengthen these climate crises.
I mean, you think about what you said. Mother Nature don't care about your politics. Mother Nature don't care how much money you got in your pocket, right? I mean, and we talking about climate change. Now, folks are listening, out there, like, hey, climate change is not real. You may not believe in climate change, but believes in you if you black, if you Latino, if you indigenous. You may not believe in climate change, but believes in you if you are low income, if you are underinsured and uninsured. You may not believe in climate change, but believes in you if you live in the floodplain, right? So when we talk about these issues, you got some folks who got, I like to say, I'm going to explain this, compounding vulnerabilities. You are vulnerable when you ain't got health insurance, right? You don't have health care. Because when that disaster hits, who's going to take care of your medicine? Who's going to take care of your uncle on dialysis? How are you going to be able to get treatment, right? When a disaster hits, when you're in a floodplain, it's a floodplain for a reason, right? So you may get flooded out. Now, when that disaster hit, if you black, think about the history of black folks being mistreated in the healthcare system and being forgotten. Think about all those black folks who were forgotten after Hurricane Katrina, right? You've been invisible, right? So we got these invisible people. And then when you're low income, you may not have the money to get out of harm's way. Hurricane Katrina, what did it hit, Mustafa, on August 29th, 2005? Folks ain't been paid yet. People kept asking, well, why didn't they leave? I ain't been paid, y'all. I don't have a car. There's not a good mass transit system. You remember all those school buses in New Orleans that were flooded? That shows a lack of preparation, man. You got to understand that your low income folks, people who are fighting to take care of their families, maybe living paycheck to paycheck, they didn't have a paycheck. They may not have money in their bank account, right, to get out of harm's way. So we got to prioritize those folks.
Yeah, it's about disaster planning, right? So we can't pretend like these things are not going to happen. That's why we're blessed to be able to work with all kinds of incredible people around the country. Reverend Leo Woodbury has been putting together these disaster kits to help people when things strike, whether it might be floods or hurricanes, for people to have the essentials that they need to be able to navigate that moment. But we also got to have the conversation around,
Yes, sir.
you know, because you talked about floodplains, but we know there are all kinds of other locations that are vulnerable. And the question becomes, do people stay in an area or do they relocate? And we understand that for our folks, it is about community. And often when you're talking about relocating, you are talking about breaking up social constructs that are incredibly important, especially when we know that we are constantly under attack.
Yeah.
So it is a difficult question. If we talk about indigenous communities, you know, who are tied to the land as well, and if you're asking folks to be able to move away from these harms, that's a deep, deep set of conversations. And we always say communities speak for themselves. So, you know, we just got to figure out what that dynamic looks like.
And that's important. If you think about FEMA and how they do, you know, when people have to rebuild, how much money they give folks to rebuild, you know, that's an inequity in that process. Because a lot of our communities, as you're saying, you know, because of racism, those neighborhoods may be underfunded. They may be disinvestment, divestment. They may be sacrifice zones. They have a lot of environmental hazards. So when you think about a major hurricane, a flood event, you got the hazard that gets flooded out too. So when people are trying to escape out of that, they're escaping through a toxic soup, right? And so, you know, you got folks, again, as an descendant of an enslaved person, right? An enslaved people, you know, our folks had to settle where they could settle. Many of them settled in the swamps, in the bogs. That's the only place they're allowed to live. But now, because of the insult of hurricanes and because of our, you know, our use of fossil fuels, and many of those folks are not the ones burning all those fossil fuels, right? They're gonna be forced to leave.
Right.
That's not fair.
No, it's not fair. And we see we see places all across the country, you know, in Houston, when the hurricanes came through and those brownfields and Superfund sites were breached and all that toxic pollution was then spread across the community. So instead of it being in one location where you could clean it up, now it's all kinds of locations. We talked about Hurricane Maria and in Puerto Rico. People literally were going to Superfund sites to get water to be able to drink because everything else had been shut down. So you've got those dynamics that are going on as well. So we just got to understand these double and triple whammies that folks are actually dealing with. In Turkey Creek, Mississippi,
Yep.
you know, founded by freed folks, and then getting hit by hurricanes and these other types of things, but then rebuilding as well. So we got to do that.
I mean, you look at, and then hurricanes, folks, just don't hit coastal areas and, you know, Gulf Coast or Florida, right? Hurricanes also can get into the mountains. Look at what Hurricane Helene did, right? And people were shocked that it could get in the mountains. Look what it did to Asheville. I mean, you had people who were displaced. We saw the number of people who lost their lives, but the fact that we had people, low income, rural folks, white folks were impacted. Hurricanes, you know, and these climate disasters, again, they don't know race. They don't care about color, don't care about the part of the country you're in. So I think preparedness, whether it be hurricanes, forest fires, flooding, we got to do a better job in making sure that our most vulnerable folks are prepared, that we have good response mechanisms, and we have good infrastructure. And one thing I want to say, you know, I think there's been some innovation when it comes to how you build buildings. I mean, there's some, you saw the fires in LA. Now, some folks' homes were able to survive because of the materials they were made out of, right? So the construction materials, so having the fire resistant construction materials, let's go to Florida or let's go to the Gulf Coast where you see some places, you see neighborhoods devastated, you know, neighborhood after neighborhood devastated. Then you see that one or two homes or some neighborhoods that survive. Why? Because now they're building hurricane resistant housing. You got 3D constructions. You can build like these Lego style buildings to make them resistant. So we got to do the same thing for hurricanes, do the same thing for forest fires and earthquakes. Make sure we have the best available construction technology so everybody can survive and live in those situations. But also we got to prioritize our poor and our most vulnerable.
I agree with all that, but we also got to make sure that it is built into the zoning, right? Is built into these pieces of legislation.
But what's zoning? I mean, what is zoning?
Well, zoning is where you can build, how you can build, and we got to make sure that when we're talking about disaster, that we're building it in. Here's an example. In Phoenix, they now have something around heat and housing justice.
Yes, sir.
They just did it not too long ago. So they understand that this extreme heat that's going on in Phoenix and in other locations, that they've got to change how housing is built, how buildings are built.
And just if I remember correctly, the recent heat wave in Phoenix, didn't it get to like the 120 degrees and people's shoes were melting?
They so 127 on one day, 128 on another day, 190 on another day, and I don't know if it went above that, but folks, when they hit 100 degrees, right? Usually when you get around 95, 96 degrees, you start to actually feel that heat when you're breathing. Can you imagine what it feels like to breathe 110, 120, 130 degrees? It almost seems like you're not on Earth anymore.
No, that's hell. No, the devil is out. The devil is real. So I mean, that's some devil heat right there. So you got folks. So that means you got more
Maybe
heat
that's
stress.
what we do from now on. Meteorologists got to call it devil heat to actually get people's attention.
No, put a demon on there. Put the devil on there. Beelzebub is out. You know, all these demons, you know what I'm saying? Satan is coming to get you. It's so hot that Satan's here. So it's Satan hot. I mean, I mean, not trying to be funny. It's like could be a hot sauce, Satan hot. But you know, you got a little different scales with hot sauces. You got different scales with how hot it is. Because you can have like jalapeno hot, right? Then you have habanero hot. Then you got ghost pepper hot. Maybe people understand it, but what do you do, Mustafa? Not to be funny, make light of the situation, but what do you do when you have that type of heat, man? People experiencing.
We got to make sure we have the infrastructure in place, right? For elders, for young children, for athletes. You know, lots of times people, construction folks are all out there. So whether it's cooling centers to me is the basics, right?
Yeah.
You know, you got to have those in place. You got to make sure there's enough of them. You got to also understand that some people, like we talked about before, don't have the transportation to actually get there. I heard this one story someone had shared with me where they were trying to get to a cooling center and the bus didn't go close enough. So then they had to
walk through that heat.
And because of the medication that they were on and because of the heat, they could barely make it to the door.
So you think about that, seniors, the Pacific Northwest that had that heat dome, was that 3 to 5 years ago now? All those folks who died in their homes because Pacific Northwest wasn't prepared for that type of heat, and people didn't have air conditioning right. So even though air conditioning is problematic, at least the source, you know, you're burning fossil fuels, you're creating greenhouse gases, we got to make sure folks have AC. Another thing that people got to have, these neighborhoods got to have when it comes to heat, y'all, I said heat waves are hell for the poor and the elderly. You got to have trees, man. Every neighborhood got to have trees. In Baltimore, there was a study done, part of this Code Red project. They found that in the neighborhoods that had a tree, like a row house to row house, a 20 to 30 degree difference in temperature, right?
Right.
So every neighborhood needs to have trees. You got to have trees that can suck up that heat, man. Y'all know, for those of you from the South, having trees are really good to keep the shade. You get some lemonade, right? So your mint julep, and you have your trees and just be out in the shade. Now, just a quick side story, and I'm gonna pass the mic back to you. I was just in London recently.
You fancy.
And I was fancy, right? I was in London. I was in London during the heat wave in London, right? London is built for the cold, not for the heat. Man, it was so bad, I had to go buy some fans while I was in London, right? And I had to walk across the Thames. Is it Thames? T-H-A-M-E-S. Is that Thames or Thames? I think the British folks call it the Thames. So I'm walking across the Thames. Brother was sweating. Why didn't I take a taxi? I wanted exercise, right? But I was heat stressing while I was walking to get air conditioning units. And not air conditioning units, those are really heavy, but walking to get some fans, right?
Yeah, you had a damn fan.
And I walked 30 minutes to get fans, and I walked back. I had 2 fans in my arms, and I was sweating so bad, the sweat was dripping down my arms, and the fans was slipping as I walked across that river. But my point is, you got to it's not just a problem in America when it comes to heat and climate change. It's a problem around the world, man. But I'm glad I got those fans back to our hotel, our Airbnb. And then the guy said, "Well, who did the Airbnb host said, well, just open up the window and use the fan." He had like a 5-inch fan. It was insulting, and my wife was falling out in that. I'm gonna stop talking about that. Okay, Mustafa.
We got to make sure that the infrastructure is addressed. We understand redlining and restrictive covenants and how they pushed us into certain communities, and we can actually follow the maps that are there that show us where we've got these heat islands and this heat effect that's going on. So like you said, no matter whether it's in our country or across the planet, it's a real thing, and that's why we got to address the climate crisis and what's going on.
Yes, sir.
Sacoby, let's talk about solutions. What role should faith groups play?
I think faith groups are really important. They should be taking the lead when it comes to disaster response. I mean, faith churches, mosques, other faith centers could be disaster resilience hubs. So when you need power backup, you need water, you need medicine, churches, and they have really good relations with communities. So I think churches, faith groups should be really the center of community-based, community-driven disaster response and recovery. So Mustafa, what's one law you pass right now?
That we phase out fossil fuels.
There you
Fossil
go.
fuels are the driver, right?
Yes, sir.
We all know that, and that's the reason that we continue to have stronger and stronger climate impacts that are going on.
Get rid of that oil and gas. Y'all get to that the solar, wind, geothermal. There we go.
There it is.
So when disaster strikes, should we rebuild, sir, or should we relocate?
Well, we got to honor the voices of communities, right? They speak for themselves. It's also community, right? Community in the sense that when you talk about moving folks, relocating folks, you are breaking up that social construct. You are breaking up those who have long-term relationships and who support each other. So we got to take that into consideration, but we also know in certain locations that are going to continue to get hit time and time again. So we got to work together to figure out what the best solutions are.
So we are relocating. We got to make sure those communities that have been disproportionately impacted over years and disinvestment, divestment, that they get fair relocation funds.
Exactly.
Right? Yes, sir.
So what's one of the roles that Black and brown youth can play?
I think young people are a very important part of the social movement. So as part of this climate justice movement, that they should be leading it, driving it. You think about the Sunset movement, right? You got a lot of young people in that. You got a lot of environmental justice groups that are youth-driven, right? They should be leading the discussions, and also doing the education so they can be educating their parents and their families, but also making sure that when it comes to neighborhood level disaster response, that young people are part of that.
Without a doubt. So we're going to give a shout out to the HBCU Climate Change Consortium.
Exactly.
Right.
Dr. Wright, Dr. Bullard, their engagement with young HBCU students who are doing great work around climate change research and solutions. I mean, there's a lot of youth who are engaged, but definitely, as you just stated, HBCU should be really part of the lead in that and on that front.
There it is.
What's missing from FEMA's playbook?
Justice.
Oh, there you go.
You remember so many amazing leaders worked incredibly hard to actually get justice built into it as a criteria to make sure that it was integrated in all the things that FEMA was doing. And now we've got an administration that's not only making cuts at FEMA, but has also stripped environmental justice and climate justice from the federal agencies.
And why it's important is think about equity and justice in preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. If you're not focused on the least of these, right? You look at the former Pope who passed, his encyclical on climate change. He talked about, like what we should be doing about climate change. He talked about the poor. We should be focusing on the poor and the most vulnerable and prioritizing them, our seniors, children, in our, again, response, preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, adaptation. That's the way to go.
If we save the vulnerable, we save everybody else.
That's right.
Sacoby, let's go also back to something we were about to talk about around wildfires and brown communities, right? With all these natural disasters, there's this extra element now, right? So if you just got hit by a flood or a wildfire or a hurricane or a number of these other climate disasters, with all these dynamics we currently have going on in our country, where do you go?
Yeah.
You can no longer just go and ask many of the individuals in the government for assistance that we had before, because you might get arrested.
Yeah, I think again, churches have always been a safe haven for people, and when it comes to sanctuary, literal sanctuary, we got to connect sanctuaries to saving people from these climate disasters. And I think when folks who are experiencing immigration attacks from ICE, particularly when, again, I think it happened during the summer, right? Weren't they trying, was people were trying to get help, they were rounding up folks.
That's right.
So I think the churches will play a really important role. Those direct aid, mutual aid groups, they have to step up. We have to support them to make sure that our brown brothers and sisters are being protected in this moment, not just from ICE, but also during these climate events.
Right. I remember farm workers as the wildfires were burning and seeing the smoke and the flames, and they were still in the fields working. And I imagine then with this extra element, if they can't run toward the flames, but they can't come backwards either to escape, because there could be agents who are there or others. So we've got to make sure that we are speaking out and that we are pushing back against injustice anywhere that it might show up.
We got to show up and show out for everybody. There's an octopus of oppression that's happening in this country. You got racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, right? I mean, you got attacks on brown folks, you got attacks on indigenous people. We got to be attacking all those arms of oppression. We can't just focus on one thing. We got to focus on all the arms.
What did Dr. King say? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Exactly. So we have to be doing it in this moment. And so don't just think that's because it's a disaster, a wildfire, it's not impacting all of us. It is, but some of us are being impacted more, and we gotta prioritize them.
As we close out today, we are focused on making sure that we have 21st century infrastructure to keep you and your family safe. Call your local representative and make sure that you share with them what your expectations are. We'll see you on the next episode.
Peace.